Hi guys, welcome back to the Spurred On podcast. It's 2 mornings after the night before. So what I thought would be good is to get a Chelsea fan on to get their viewpoint, because we kind of started afresh at the same time, and obviously they stole the love of our lives. So I'm going to introduce you to Matt Beadle. He is a television presenter. He is a football coach and also a Chelsea fan. Matt, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Barney. Thanks very much for having me. I was wondering, does this mean that I'm going to lose my powers like Superman or something does when he is confronted with kryptonite? You know, a Chelsea fan being on a Tottenham podcast, or are we going to be okay?
Well, as a Tottenham fan, all I can say is I hope so. I hope you lose all of your powers in the same way that you banished all our powers the other night. So I guess probably the starting point is, was it as mental from where you were looking that game as it was to all of us?
You know what? I mean, I've been watching high-level football for 40 years. I honestly think it's in my top 3 craziest football matches I've ever seen. You know, I was thinking the other day, I reckon Liverpool, Arsenal 89, you know, last game of the season, that's got to be right up there. And Liverpool, Newcastle, you know, one of those 4-3s, was that 96? Yeah. Those were just unbelievable games, but my team wasn't involved. And then, unfortunately for you guys as well, you know, the so-called Battle of the Bridge a few years ago, the Leicester thing. I enjoyed that night. Obviously, I did, you know, with pure Schadenfreude. But you know, and Hazard's goal was great, but it wasn't the best game of football I've ever seen. But Monday night was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, 5 goals, 5 disallowed goals, 2 red cards, potentially 2 more red cards. I think James and Colwill can consider themselves genuinely
Which was the Colwill one? I remember the James elbow, obviously.
He just lost it, just went absolutely
mental, right.
Just like shoving everyone.
And the commentators were saying, I don't know which commentators you were listening to, but the commentators on Sky were saying that they felt actually that Emerson Royale saved Colwill there by getting in the way. What they should have done is let him keep attacking us.
No, I give you that. I mean, I know he's young and all, but he just absolutely lost it. So, and I thought the James thing, I wouldn't have given a red card. I'm a Chelsea fan, but I've seen him given, right? You know, that whole, you know, leverage thing, or whatever. He's looking at the ball, but you know, it could have been 4 red cards, 20 minutes added time. And then, of course, we've got, I think, I'm sure you're going to want to talk about the high line of Tottenham, which from a Chelsea perspective was an invitation, but it made for an absolutely cracking game, right?
Yeah. So I'm just going to start just because of, you mentioned the red cards, and I want to lead on to VAR a bit as well. Do you feel, because I feel, and actually I think Mark Clattenburg has since talked about the Battle of the Bridge as his determination not to give a red card so as not to incite the rest of the game. With the early kind of kick from Romero and obviously the 2-footed challenge from Destiny Udogie, do you feel like that was the referee and potentially even the VAR doing the same thing? And then eventually it got to a point where Romero had completely lost his head and went through on Enzo Fernandez.
Yeah, Romero had clearly just woken up that day, hadn't he, and just said, I'm going to leave my print on this game.
Well, or do you think Pochettino being Argentinian and Enzo Fernandez being Argentinian, do you think there's a possibility that a big part of that team talk was, here's how to press the buttons of Christian Romero?
Wow. I love it. It's a bit tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but I like it. I'm not sure that they've gone that far.
It is, except in the All or Nothing documentary for Spurs with Jose Mourinho, they showed a clip of him at halftime, I think in a Man City game, saying, you will get this player sent off if you do this, this, and this. So I know what you mean. It is conspiracy theory, and we've got no evidence to back it up, but it does happen, clearly.
But coaches definitely know, you know, they have profiles on each player and how they react to certain situations or whatever, and of course they'll tell the player marking them to push the buttons. But Romero, I have the feeling that even if Fernandez hadn't been anywhere near in the whole game, he still would have done it just felt like he was going to do a Cantona-esque dive into the crowd if he didn't have a player to find. I don't know what he was on that day, but
it is actually just part of his makeup. You have to take the rough with the smooth.
Exactly. He's a great footballer. He wins a lot of balls back for you that in the past Spurs centre midfielders haven't won back, right? He's terrifying with regards to that. But I'm afraid I put a little bit of blame on the door of the referee as well. He did let it go, and it made for this, you know, amazing London derby kind of feel, which is fantastic, which we all want to see. But it looked a little bit Chelsea Leeds from the 1970s at a couple of points. You know, it went too far, and then chasing your tail as a referee, and then all of a sudden you're VARing everything, you know, because you're thinking, oh, it's gonna kick off here, and it kind of nearly did, which is a pity.
And Yeah, perfect timing. So VAR, I think I heard I'm not getting the stats correct here, but there was something like I heard on a Spurs podcast last night in that first half, 24 minutes of play and 34 or 36 minutes of VAR time. You're an old man like me.
Yeah.
Well, I've got 2 points actually, because something's kind of come up in my mind. Firstly, how do you feel about it? Do you think it adds to the excitement, or do you think it's too much? What would you do with it? And secondly, is there a chance that players are now getting injured, do you think, because they're waiting around for so long that they're not warming up and they're not warming down? And I mean, I'm biased, so I'm going to say Mickey van der Ven, who is obviously a pace player, he's literally pulled his hamstring about 2 minutes after one of those long layoffs. So, but firstly, how do you feel about VAR?
The second question is a really interesting one. I feel very strongly about VAR. I live in Germany. You didn't mention that to your audience. I'm English, but I live in Germany. I coach the reserves team of a German pro football club. And so, I experienced the German football world, but I watch the Premier League all the time. And one of the lowest points in my entire life was the Lampard shot that went past over Neuer's shoulder and went 3 feet over the line.
Yeah, World Cup 2010, wasn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah. So, and I remember sitting watching that goal, saying, we have to make that. We have to go that step now. We have to go to technology. Whether it's VAR or Hawkeye or whatever, we have to now, because that's just not right. And so
But to be fair, which they did with goal line technology, and that's great because it's yes or no. That nobody complains about that ever.
They did, but then it was a bit of a sliding scale, and I found myself over the years going, yeah, the goal line technology has worked more or less. I remember Bolton getting relegated, right, because of that, losing 20 million basically because that one of their goals didn't count. There have been so many key moments where I thought, or the wrong player getting sent off, all these stupid things. Yeah. So I was generally for it, but to this day, I cannot understand why they don't do it the same as almost every other sport. Tennis has had it for years, and it's absolutely brilliant. I think cricket do it brilliantly. American football, hockey do it brilliantly. And what they all do is that the coaches get challenges, challenges per half. In cricket, if you use a challenge, in American football, if you use a challenge, you lose a timeout. So it's like they have to weigh up the importance. And I'm sorry, let's take this game on Monday as an example. The 5 goals that were all VAR'd for hours and hours, and all the different fouls and all the elbows and all the little tiny things that were VAR'd, I would argue that 9 out of 10 of those, neither coach cared less about, right? Or didn't see, or thought, I'm more focused on this at the moment. And what I'm finding at the moment is the VAR is wasting so much time on things that most people in the stadium and watching at home don't even notice. You hear the commentator go, yeah, I know, there's a shot of goal and the ball goes into the crowd, and there's a bit of a lull and they go and get the ball or whatever, and you hear the commentator go, oh, they're VARing something. And you're watching it, you're going, what are they VARing? No one's seen anything. Those things drive me nuts. And on Monday night, you could have saved so much time, because I reckon Pochettino would have VAR'd maybe Caicedo's goal. If be like, well, why wasn't that given? Because that looked, to me, that didn't look offside at all.
And maybe the Son disallowed goal as well.
And the Son disallowed goal. I'm sure that Ange would have asked to VAR that. You know what I mean? And the rest of it, you could have saved.
Yeah.
That's how I stand on it. I agree. I appreciate that there are other people who've got an issue with that, but I think you'd save a whole load of time, and it would make for good theatre, because afterwards they'd be like, oh, and you didn't VAR that. Why didn't you do that? And it's the same. They asked the England cricket captain the same thing, and he's like, well, I thought that was LBW and I didn't think that one was, so I had to go.
And so you'd give it to the managers, not the captains.
Maybe give it to the captains. Maybe that's a better idea. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I'm just intrigued by it. The second thing I wanted to say, I mean, we'll go on to the injury bit, which I still want to talk about. But the second thing just that you made me think about is some people I heard talking on an excellent Tottenham podcast called The Extra Inch last night mentioned something that I thought was really important, which is now it's drifted over now, where the game isn't for the people in the stadium anymore. It's for the people at home. It used to be the fact that the people in the stadium had the kind of one up on the people at home, because they'd be able to see things that maybe some of the cameras couldn't get, and they'd know exactly what was going on. But now some of the people who were at the game that I was listening to were saying there were numerous times where they had no idea what was going on. And that's wrong, isn't it? That's wrong.
I haven't heard a single argument as yet as to why that has to be like that. They've got pretty much every stadium's got these ridiculously massive screens that are pointless. They're basically just massive PowerPoint screens that no one really needs. For goodness sake, use them. It's just pressing one button. Some guy in the control room's got to press one button that says the people at home can see it and the people in the stadium can see it. Why are we allowed to see it? The only mini counter argument could be that people could kick off and you'd hear people going, no way, that's not it. But they spend 90 minutes saying
that is it, though. That is it. Because when I used to steward at Spurs, we were specifically told that the reason why they weren't allowed to show any replays of any tackles or anything, or even of away goals that were offside, is because of the inciting the crowd argument. But
I don't buy that. I'm sorry, I don't buy that, because their crowds are. It's a London derby. It's Tottenham, Chelsea. Everyone's incited anyway.
Of course.
It's the most. It's arguably, certainly on our calendar, Tottenham away is the biggest day of the year, so they're up for it anyway. Yeah. So I don't buy that argument. I'm sorry, and you got to treat them like adults, and expect them not.
What do you think about this injury thing that I've come up with, like, out of nowhere? But for some reason, I'm so angry about the loss of our best defender that I've had to come up with a conspiracy theory.
No, I don't. Yeah, I would put you down for a conspiracy theory, but I think it's a really good point you mentioned. Just this week, coincidentally, my coaching staff and I did some research into, because we're considering, we send our players to go and warm up, 5 minutes after the second half starts, right?
Yeah.
And then we send 6-7 players out there, and then we call them over. You're allowed to sub 5 times these days. We call them over as we need them. And we realized that some of them are like warming up for 40 minutes. If you got extra, some of them are warming up for nearly an hour. It just seems stupid. So we, coincidentally, of your question, we did some research, and I looked into some of the literature this week, and there's a lot of good literature from 2022, stuff like that, on the subject of re-warming up, right? That actually it's better to send the player away for 10 minutes, then he sits down for 15 minutes, then he goes away for another 10 minutes, and to have phases of it. And there's a reason for that, because keeping the muscles warm is hugely important. I think you're onto something here. I really do. And not just because of the hammy injury from Monday night, but there are
stats saying there are huge stats now for how many more injuries there are in the last few years. And obviously everyone's talking about it's because of the World Cup and there's so much more football being played. And I'm sure that, of course, that factors in as well. But I just wonder whether this is a factoring in that needs to be taken into account when they're laying out the kind of pros and cons of VAR in its current state, which it has become the most talked about thing in football. And that's not right either, in my opinion.
It was supposed to be introduced so that we're not talking about those pointless referee decisions anymore. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it needs to be looked into, and not only from a physical perspective, yes, there will be muscle injuries, but also for a cognitive point of view, staying switched on in the fastest game of the year, in the fastest league in the world, for the potentially 60th time this year is an enormous cognitive challenge that these players are put through. And now the games are not 90 minutes anymore. They're now 110 minutes. Of course. I think it's going to lead to a lack of quality. I think people are going to make more mistakes because they're going to be switched off, because they're going to have hamstring injuries or whatever, and it's just going to become sloppier. And we love the league because it's so tight and it's so good, right?
Yeah. So moving on, I guess, to as you mentioned earlier, this will become, if the game before was the Battle of the Bridge, this will be like the High Line Derby or something mental like that. I have to say, so I was watching in my living room with my flatmate, and I was screaming at the screen. I have to say, so in hindsight, I get it. Like Postecoglou is saying, I am testing you now as players. Are you willing to play the same way, even though you're down to 9 men, to prove to me that no matter what happens this season and in forthcoming seasons, you will never go to your default setting under Conte and Mourinho, which has been backwards, negative, blah, blah, blah. And they did it. But it was unbearable as a Spurs fan to watch. But then also it got to a point, I think about 75 minutes, where it became hilarious because Chelsea was so bad at finding what seemed such an easy key to the lock. So I'm intrigued as a Chelsea fan, first and foremost, before on a coaching side, what did you think watching that kind of 20-minute period?
I was watching it with my son, who's 15. He's a good footballer himself. And I must have said, I can't believe what I'm seeing 20 times. Yeah. And I really couldn't believe it. And I respect the guy hugely. He did an amazing job at Celtic. He is doing an amazing job at Tottenham. He's getting Tottenham to play the way that, I was brought up in the 80s with Hoddle and and Waddle and all of these players. He's playing the way that I think Tottenham should play and want to play. And as all the Tottenham fans I know say that they want to play that way, I have huge respect for it. But it is absolute suicide. It is tactical. It is tactical suicide. It's very hard with 11 players, but with 9, it's almost impossible. And he was talking about philosophy a lot after the game, right? Which I respect. And I think I saw a quote that he said, "I'd do it if we went down to 5 men."
Yeah.
There must be a moment, not just in football, but in any professional pursuit, where pragmatism has to be philosophy, right? Because the reason the back 4 stands high, or the back line, whatever it may be, is to reduce the distances between the other lines so that it makes it possible to press, right? You know, we haven't talked about the first 20 minutes, but Tottenham absolutely destroyed Chelsea for 20 minutes, not only with beautiful flowing football, but with absolutely strangling pressing. Phenomenal. And it works because the front 3 press Chelsea's back line so much, and then the midfield push up, and then the back 4 push up, so that even if Chelsea do get out of the press and chip the ball into midfield or whatever, there's another line coming. If you do that without that front 3, so there was no press, there was no pressure on the ball. There were times when Silva had the ball, or James had the ball, and he had 25 yards of space, and you'd never get 2 yards of space in the Premier League, let alone 20. And then he's looking up, and he's got 4 players making a run into the in behind. Which player shall I dink the ball over? I'm sorry, it made Tottenham look silly, and I respect Postecoglou hugely for sticking to his philosophy. But if Chelsea, and let's talk about how badly Chelsea did it. How many balls did Chelsea chip over the top, and it went to the goalkeeper?
I know.
You've got 40 yards of space. You see videos of pros at training, you know, on Instagram, and then chipping balls into buckets and stuff. They couldn't put it in a car park. They couldn't hit a massive target.
Yeah, I'd say during that period of the game, I said it'll be Raheem Sterling who sorts this out, because everybody else had just somehow lost their mind, I think, and mistimed their runs. And the only 2 that I was impressed with, and it was Sterling who made the right run in the end, was Cucurella, who realized to make a run from deep. Like, that was clearly the thing.
From deep, exactly.
Start from deep, and you time it exactly right. And Sterling, who eventually sorted it out. I texted you a few times about this. So I think it's worth bringing up. I was really amazed. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised, but the script after the game of, you know, Nicholas Jackson, man of the match, and he got a hat-trick and whatever. But he got a hat-trick because the goals that he scored were given to him on a plate by the players, and I felt strongly that they were unwilling to pass to him. Like, they were unwilling to put him through because they didn't trust him. And then actually Cole Palmer, in the after game interview, you know, he was said, he was asked, it's been a difficult start for Nicholas. Do you think this will help him out? And Cole Palmer just went, yeah, it has been difficult for him. Let's not lie about it. And it's like, I just don't think they rate him. But like, in the end, the finishes he made were from 6 yards. Yeah. And even the one-on-one, he was desperate to pass it. I think he was shitting himself.
Bonnie, I don't disagree with you, but unfortunately, you've made Tottenham look even worse here, because if you play a system that allows Jackson to score 3 goals and a half, something's wrong.
No, I agree. But I personally am choosing, and maybe this is my, glass half full thing. I'm choosing to think that this is Postecoglou using this situation as a long-term kind of
a statement. This is the kind of football we're going to play, come what may.
Because also, the last time Spurs went down to 9 men, I think, was about 20 years ago against Everton away, as far as I remember. It's totally bizarre to me that it's happened twice at our stadium this season. Liverpool went down to 9 men, and now Spurs go to 9 men. It's very, very rare. But I think he was just... And then the other thing I think is just like, well, you're down to 9 men, you're going to lose anyway. So when it happened to Liverpool this season, and I was at that game, Klopp actually did shut up shop. And you'd actually think, well, the one person who probably won't is Klopp, but he did, and he went very narrow and eventually kind of even took off all the attacking players, I think. And then they lost in the last kick of the game, right? And I think maybe Postecoglou's like, well, at this period of my situation at Spurs, 3 months in, what's more important? That we lose in a way that teaches us for the long term, or that we lose, valiantly in the last kick of the game or whatever? So I choose to think it's that, but I totally understand that. I think people who are not invested in Tottenham in the same way would just look at it and think, you are mental. I get that.
Yeah, no, I totally see what you've done there. I don't consider him mental. I'm genuinely a huge fan. I love the way that Celtic played football, for example. I think he's going to do brilliantly. And I think your argument is fair. It's very, very rare as a coach that you have to coach a team that's gone down to 9 players. You know, managers all the time, every couple of weeks, will have a session where they'll play 10v9 deliberately. How do we get organized again? What does our shape look like if we do go down to 10 men?
Right.
But I don't know a single coach who's ever trained that, under the hypothesis that we'll go down to 9 men. So,
yeah.
So
it kind of looked like they had, though. To me, it kind of looked like maybe that wasn't, because it straight away they were on that line, and it struck me they were even higher than they were when they've got 11 men. Like Dyer was on the halfway line. I was like, what are you doing?
I think that, I know. I think the reason for that is because they were trying to get some pressure on the ball. So if they stood higher, they were hoping that the midfield would play higher. You mentioned Dyer, and I think this is an important point as well. Philosophy, come what may, you've got to have the right players to do that, right? There's a reason why Joe Hart was booted out at Man City, because he can't play that system, right? He's a great goalkeeper. I love Dyer as well. I love him for England, and I loved him as much as any England fan when he scored that penalty. But he's not a player. He's not a one-on-one player. You know, he doesn't have the pace.
I'll tell you why, because he turns like a tugboat, but he's incredibly quick once he gets going, ironically.
Right, but that's why he was, I don't know whether you noticed, but that's why he was getting into this sort of sideways surfer position, right? Just anticipating the pass to try and give himself an extra yard. I respect that, but he's just not it's like, as a Chelsea fan, it would be like asking Thiago Silva to do that. Okay, I know he's 7 years older or whatever, but he's the same, or a John Terry or whatever. You don't ask John Terry and Gary Cahill to play that kind of system. So if you don't have the players, and I know Dyer hasn't played much, and I know he got subbed on, but then as a manager, I'm thinking, okay, I've got my philosophy, but today I don't have Johnny and Bobby to do that philosophy, so I'm going to have a plan B because I've got Eric Dyer and a couple of others.
Yeah, no, I get that. Okay, so we've waxed lyrical about this for actually much longer than I thought. So I'm going to go into now, just to kind of finish off, how do you see the difference between where Tottenham are now and where Chelsea are now, kind of 3 months into their new managership? Obviously, I'd say it's worth pointing out the main difference is Chelsea have spent a lot of money and Tottenham have lost their best ever player. So that's me kind of adding in my 2 pence worth. But I think it's worth asking you, where do you think the two clubs are? And also, how do you think the season will pan out?
Light years. They're absolutely light years apart. Tottenham, the way you started the first 25 minutes, I thought it was going to be a cricket score, and absolutely deserved. You sliced us to pieces. For 25 minutes. To be fair to Chelsea, they came back into it and they had that sort of frenetic period, with a couple of offside goals and whatever. So they didn't let their heads go down, but Tottenham were clearly a class above and clearly looked like everyone in the system knows what their job was. There are little things that need tidying up or whatever, but no, Tottenham are absolutely light years ahead of Chelsea at the moment, and that pains me hugely to say.
Do you think that's because because obviously I love Pochettino. It's difficult that he's gone to Chelsea, but I also don't think he was left with much choice.
Though, didn't he? He got a lot of booing.
I don't think they were given a lot of opportunity to boo as much as maybe they would have liked to, because we turned the sound system up, and we tend to do that in difficult moments. But it's difficult. It's difficult that he went for Chelsea, but I personally don't think he was left with much choice. He was flirting with Spurs. Like back end of last season, he was on Instagram every day, like, "Oh, I'm at another golf day with the Tottenham legends," and I think he was interested in coming back. But I think I personally think Levy saw something when interviewing Postecoglou. It was like, this might be the safer option in terms of not going back. But
do you want to hear my take?
Yeah.
I reckon if he had gone back, you wouldn't be as good as you are now.
No, well, that's what I was going to say and I was going to ask about Pochettino at Chelsea, and I wonder if the reason why it feels to you that we're far further ahead is because Pochettino knows, having been given so many new players and particularly new young players, whether he needs to kind of drip feed the philosophy a bit slower whilst those players are bedding in, rather than just hitting all these kids at once and you've got to do it like this, because if they fail at that at the start, there's nowhere for him to go, is there?
I agree with that completely, and I would add that disastrous season that Chelsea had last year. Whether Tottenham fans want to hear this or not, Chelsea are one of the biggest clubs in the world in the last 20 years. And then they became an absolute mess. To have another season where you're a complete mess because you're trying new things, I think we would have gone through a manager a month. So I think that's why we're seeing a slightly more pragmatic Pochettino. I think he's trying to get the foundation built. You don't have much time at Chelsea. Everybody knows that. But I think it's showing that he's sort of matured a little bit, because I think a Pochettino 5 years ago, also the Pochettino that came from Tottenham, that came from
PSG,
Southampton
Southampton,
and went to Tottenham was like da da da, rock and roll football. But that's quite a few years ago now, and I think he's mellowed a little bit. It's interesting now that I've just said that. I realise quite a few managers seem to do that, don't they? Klopp's mellowing a little bit, like you said. He does close up sometimes. Mourinho went from this fantastic, exciting manager to just the dullest of all time. So
yes, I know.
enjoy Ange while you've got him, while he's in the zone.
I think so. It is a very exciting time to have him. So just lastly then, prediction kind of for the rest of the season. Where do you envisage Chelsea and Spurs kind of ending up from a Chelsea fan's point of view for Chelsea, and then from the outside with Spurs?
I reckon Chelsea, to be fair, they're not great, but they have dominated the ball in most of the games, and they've been done on the break a couple of times by teams that I think they had on that day deserved to win. So I think that the position is a little bit worse than it should be, but I can see them finishing top half, maybe scraping into Europe or something, and I think that would be good.
Can I just say, before you go on Spurs, you must know, living in Germany, more about Nkunku than I do. Do you think he might be the difference?
He's a fantastic footballer. Really, really exciting footballer. Seriously. He reminds me of Michael Owen. He is really, really exciting. But having said that, I said that about Werner as well. So,
I rated Timo Werner, actually. I was surprised it didn't work out for him.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think he could make a huge difference when he comes back. And I would be hugely surprised if Tottenham don't get into the Champions League. I think you're easily good enough to do that. Seriously, these couple of injuries now, you got to see how that pans out. But no, I also never thought I'd say this, but I think the way you're playing football, I'd be happy for you to get in the Champions League. I think that'd be deserved.
What a place to end. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Can you please tell the audience where they can find you? Maybe they want to employ a presenter or something like that, or get you on their podcast. Where can they find your stuff?
That's very kind. The easiest way, I guess, would be my website, mattbeadle.com, MATTBEADLE.com. So yeah, I host events and films and corporate stuff and a little bit of TV, that kind of thing. Thanks for having me on today, Barney. I really enjoyed it.
No problem. And guys at home, don't forget, if you're listening to this on one of your podcast platforms, please do also go over to YouTube, youtube.com/@BarnabySlater_ and vice versa. If you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe and follow, be it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. Listen to this show in your car or when you're having a run. And don't forget, come on, you Spurs.